Hi, I'm Julie. I've been taking the drama out of divorce through mediation for over 25 years. Lately, I've noticed a trend. Almost every couple who comes to me is from Gen X. That means Gen X is getting divorced at an alarmingly high rate. Let's talk about why the women are getting a divorce. First of all, women do trigger about 80% of the divorces. Trigger meaning they're the ones who are asking for the initial divorce. And so the women's stories are very important here because they are the ones who are asking for the divorces. A typical Gen X woman comes to me and says the exact same thing that almost every Gen X woman has said before her. Her story is so cookie cutter, I could tell it to her before she even says anything. And this is what they tell me. They say, I'm in a 20 plus year marriage and I've been unhappy since year 10. Okay, well, what's been going on since year 10? I've been asking, I've been begging on my knees, crying for change. And he changes for like 3 days, 3 months, 3 weeks, but then it always goes back to the same. And I'm breaking and I need change and I can't do this anymore and I am done. And they always emphasize the word done. I am done. And because they want me to know that I'm not talking them out of this. And then there's variations on the story, like maybe they both are working full-time or mostly full-time, but she's doing most of the chores, not all, but most of the chores. By chores, I mean like domestic labor, I mean mental load, I mean emotional labor, all that kind of stuff. There could also be this scenario where she's not working, he's working, and she's doing 100% of all those things. There could be the scenario where she's not working or she is working, he's working, and there's alcoholism at play as well. I don't know why, but alcoholism comes up a lot. It's usually not hard drugs. It's usually not marijuana. It's almost always alcohol. And alcohol creates this really chaotic environment for people, especially in the evenings, because there are so many functioning alcoholics out there where they can go to work every day and then they come home and they get plastered drunk and they start becoming chaotic and unpredictable, and that's not a way for the other person to want to live. So then they keep telling me, I've been begging, I've been pleading for change, and he changes for 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. I have no idea why it's always in threes. But the most important part of the story is the husbands continue to go back to the normal that the wives are complaining about. And both sides have a role here. She begged for change, and she has a legitimate reason to be asking for that change. But there was no consequence to the husband not changing. So he did change, things got better. He then reverted back to normal because that's easier for him. He likes that normal. He doesn't like the changes that she's been asking for. But there's been no consequence. And because there's no consequence, we kind of are teaching the Gen X husbands that this is normal and this is how things go, up and down, up and down. She acts up, you put your head down, and things will be normal. And so that's what he's been experiencing for 20 years as well. And as I've mentioned, 80% of the divorces are initiated by women. That means 20% of the divorces are initiated by men. So what do the Gen X men who are initiating divorces tell me? Well, they tell me that they're in sexless marriages. They tell me that they're begging their wives for sex and they can't take it anymore. And so they both are done. Now, just as I said that there are reasons why the Gen X men, within the context of the wife pulling the trigger, were kind of taught by the wives to behave this way, it's also true that the reason why the Gen X men who are pulling the trigger, who are in the sexless marriage, there's a reason for that too. And it usually comes back to the women telling me that they're doing all the chores, they're doing all the emotional labor, and they're breaking. They don't feel like they're a priority. And why would they want to have sex with somebody who is treating them this way? So the men griping about not having sex is a legitimate gripe because, side note, having done this for 25 years, both women and men like to have sex in their marriages. It is a fallacy that only men like to have sex in their marriages. There are a few women who would prefer a sexless marriage, but guess what? There are a few men who would prefer a sexless marriage too. On the whole, both genders truly want to have sex with their partner. So when women aren't having sex with their husbands, it's because they're tired, they're broken, and they don't want to have sex with their husbands. It doesn't mean they don't want to have sex. So if sex is a healthy part of a relationship, a healthy part of a marriage, and if both genders want it, and if the men are complaining that they're not getting sex, then that is a legitimate complaint. The reasons he's not having sex are still tied into that wife's story, though, about feeling overworked, overburdened, and not a priority and not important. So why is Gen X getting divorced at an alarmingly high rate? I think it has to do with cultural and generational expectations. Gen X was raised by boomers, and boomers presented to us a very traditional marriage with traditional gender roles. But we were taught that boys and girls are equal and that girls can work in the workforce just as much as boys can. And so we did that in our marriages. And we thought we were doing great. And we were. So much better than our parents. But we weren't doing enough. Meaning that if we're going to have both people in the workforce, then we have to share the burden at the home between the kids and the housework and the mental load and the emotional load. And if we're not sharing that, then one party is being burdened with all of that. And life is not 50-50. Marriage is not 50-50 every single day. But overall, it does need to be shared in some sort of way. And that doesn't mean that you both have to do 50-50 of everything. But it means of the total amount of work that it takes to run a relationship, to run a successful marriage, there needs to be half the burden on each side. And that just didn't happen because of the way we were modeled by our boomer parents, by the way we were taught in school, and by the way we started our Gen X marriages, which was in fairly traditional roles. But that couldn't keep happening because the women were breaking. And when the women were breaking, they stopped having sex with their husbands. And when the husbands were no longer having sex, that's when they realized they were unhappy. But at that point, both people were unhappy. And eventually somebody pulled the trigger. And for some reason, it's 80% of women who pull the trigger. They're the ones who are willing to say, I am unhappy and I'm done. For some reason, the men don't do that as often, but it doesn't mean they're not unhappy. They are. I don't want you to get a divorce. If you can save your marriage, save your marriage. Divorce is hard and marriage is hard. Choose your hard. But if you find yourself needing a divorce, then you might want to consider divorce mediation.